a little bit more like in terms of how we're going to start this kind of section of the talk, I'll say a little bit about Atlas Arts and who we are, and then Lauren will go into her practice and the project that we're working on together, and then we'll move on to having a kind of more open discussion. So I'll just share my screen now and show some slides that will hopefully be a bit of a visualization for you. I would note that I get a little bit nervous with public speaking and I tend to talk quite fast. So if you need me to repeat anything at any point, just give me a shout and I can do. But I will just share my screen now. Can everyone see that? Okay. Yeah. So, as Laura said, I'm the producer at Atlas Arts, and I'm also currently working as the co-director with my colleague Robin, as my other colleague Ainsley is off on maternity leave. We're quite a small team. There's only four of us. My other colleague Catherine, I think, who's in the audience today as well, joins us, and we work, as you can see on this map, across the island of Skye, the island of Raasay, and part of the mainland of Scotland as well. So in Lochalsh. So it's quite a big geographic area. It spans two islands and then part of the mainland, and there's around about 10,000 people living on Skye. I thought I would start with that as just a bit of context because I think it's an interesting thing to be thinking about in terms of like what islandness is and in terms of the distinct identity. And we have a sort of quote that we use quite a lot, or I've been thinking about a lot, that Catherine shared one time about, I'm going to butcher it, Catherine, I'm afraid, but around how often a mist may be falling down in Armadale that may have lifted by the Ord Road end. And I think that that's a really great description of how, while it is a distinct place as an island, you can access it by boat and by bridge. There's lots of different communities, different towns and villages, different cultural practices, different language in terms of Gaelic language and English and Scots. And so it's a place of many things happening, plural things happening all at once. But Atlas is an arts organisation. We organise sort of collective art projects across the region, which is in the northwest of Scotland. We work with artists and local residents to have conversations that are rooted in this place, in this time. And our programme often includes things like long-term artist residency projects. We have bookmaking, we have film screenings, and various different forms of kind of celebratory events in different scales. And what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to run through a few of them as examples of kind of where we're at and what we've been doing, and then leading into some of the thoughts and things we've been thinking through with Lauren. That photo on the sort of bottom right hand corner is the view that we have from our office in Portree. We're very spoiled. So I guess one of the things that we were talking about previously, Laura, was around the ways that art practice can exist here, and the various different types of art practice and what people need in terms of making as well. And one thing that you noticed that was quite interesting about Atlas Arts is that we don't have an exhibition venue. We don't have a sort of what you would describe as maybe a more traditional kind of exhibition space or venue. And in terms of the history of Atlas, that kind of comes from the closure of one of the local gallery spaces called Ansure, and that closed in about 2013, I think, before Atlas had been established as an organisation and a charity. And there was a period of time where there was a bit of consultation around, well, what is the provision for contemporary art and visual art here, and what's missing? And Ansure was a really well-loved exhibition and gallery space. It was sort of a community space in Portree that people came together and shared at, and so it is really missed. But following a consultation after that closed, there was a proposal put together to set up what is now Atlas Arts. And it was different artists and the council funding as well that came together to sort of do that consultation. And the proposal was, well, where else can art exist? Maybe it could be an organisation that moves in different ways. And so that's kind of our model. We travel to different places. We often use unusual venues, perhaps, village halls as well. We spend quite a lot of time in, and so in terms of like the need for spaces to come together, we sometimes have to think quite creatively about that. I'm going to talk about a project called From Plockton to Portree, which is part of a culture collective fund that was funded through kind of post-COVID funding, and an artist called Malcolm Mackenzie. And I think it is a really great example of this idea of like, well, where else does art exist if it's not in a gallery space or it's not in a studio space? You know, we came together to make these two boats collectively, and one of them was in a boat shed. Another one was in an aircraft hangar that was disused, and the community used it to build their own boats. One in Portree, where I'm based, and one in Plockton, where Malcolm, the artist, is based. And we made these two absolutely incredible boats and had various celebrations. But Malcolm's practice is really about that kind of question of like, how do people come together and make, you know, where are we doing that? How are communities formed? And it was through the process of building these two boats last year with the two sort of groups that we started to tease out some of these questions. And they're ongoing, you know, there's never an answer to them. One of the other things that we do quite a lot at Atlas, and my colleague Catherine really leads on as well, is the Making Publics Press. In terms of thinking about where does art and creativity exist, I think that books are such an incredible thing. And we have an amazing resource called the Making Publics Press that is currently based in the Atlas office, but you can see here's travelled. That was down in Ancreve, one of the village halls in the south of the island. And it is it's a bookmaking sort of set of equipment. So there's a perfect binder, there's a guillotine, and there's a creaser. And the idea is that people can come and they can make books. And so it's a really incredible resource, and I think it sort of sparks people's imagination in quite a special way. And we really love it. You can see some examples of two books that people have made. And I think that opens up kind of questions of like, who's publishing, who's getting to publish, in what ways. You know, with something like the press, you can bind 5 copies, and then you can make some changes, and then you can bind 5 more copies and get them out in the world. It's a popular one as well for sketchbooks. I'm always making sketchbooks out of the bookbinder too. But in terms of thinking about how do we resource things in terms of islands, you know, this is a pay what you can resource. People can come and use it and make their own projects as well. And so it's kind of led by what other folks' interests are. And then lastly, before we move on to Lauren and talking about Saula, I'll talk quite quickly about the School of Plural Futures, which is a youth-led project that we have been working on with a really great artist called Emmy McCluskey. And Emmy's practice, again, is all about collaboration and listening and working with a group of young people on the island. And it started in 2021 and is now going into its 3rd iteration this year, which is really exciting. But it's co-designed by a group of young folk. Initially, it was to start talking about kind of issues that are pertinent to young people here. It's interesting that the prompt for this kind of series is, you know, how can I stay? I don't want to not stay. And that's certainly something that comes up when we speak to young folk on the island quite regularly, the challenges of staying here and opportunities. And I guess that the School of Plural Futures kind of started by being a place to think creatively through those challenges. You know, we talk a lot about climate and social justice issues and find kind of creative tools for navigating them collectively. So this was the first year of the school. And you can see examples. We would invite different speakers and different people to join the group, you know, depending on what their interests were. So, for example, one of the young people had sort of said that they really wanted to talk about Gaelic and the kind of the difficult relationships or the many different relationships that people have with Gaelic and the loss of the language here or the desire to learn it. And so we invited Miles Campbell, who is a Gaelic poet who did a session called Two Sides of the Pass. And then the session below you can see, which is in Broadford Village Hall with the school, that was Renich Sandilands and Mary McFadden, and they were talking about how you can take over your village halls, occupy your village halls, and and talking about kind of degrowth and sort of other economic and value systems that can exist for people, and what young people can do in their kind of local area. So you can see here at the end of the first year, the group came together through guidance with Emmy, the artist, to make a book called A Person Is Not an Individual. And this is such an incredible book. There's a PDF available online if you want to take a look at it, and it's got a whole host of contributions and sharings from the young people, which I just love. I'm going to quite quickly talk about another project that we've been thinking about, which will lead quite nicely into Lauren's project with Asaula. And it starts by one of the sessions where we were with the School of Plural Futures, the youth-led group, and we were invited to go to a place called 11 Fasich. And this is hosted by a sort of cultural project called TUA. And TUA is a cultural project that wants to sort of explore and navigate questions around land and place in quite complex ways. And we were invited by James Oliver to spend a bit of time on the land and to start prompting some of these questions about place, belonging, what it is to be here in different ways. And James gave us a prompt to sort of discuss with the group, which was, if the land could speak and you were listening to try and understand it, what would you say back? And this same prompt, after sort of having a conversation with a group where we were all like, oh, how do you begin to think about these things? But they are questions that people are asking quite regularly here. How are you here? How do you situate yourself here? What is the land getting used for? And that kind of question was coming up quite a few times, but we weren't quite sure how to answer it. And the same question was offered to Lauren at the start of her residency, which I think we'll probably come back round to later on in the discussion. But maybe I can pass on to Lauren now just to share a bit more about your practice and then a bit more about Saula.
Can everybody hear me? Yep, screen looks okay. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Heather. And it's so lovely to be here, and I'm really excited about the conversations that will happen across the event. So I'm just going to talk really quickly. I'll give a sort of bit of a whistle-stop tour of the kind of work that I make, and then that'll segue into some of the research that has gone into the Atlas project that I was invited to, and detail that a little bit more. So I'm an artist that mainly works in sculpture and installation. I'm based in Glasgow, and I spend sort of 60-40, 70-30% time in Glasgow. The rest of the time I work on my family farm in Northern Ireland. So I am a bit of a shapeshifter in between a city and a rural context. And so I make installations. I tend not to sort of make singular objects. They tend to be objects that speak to and with each other as a constellation. And just in the interest of time, I'll read some things to keep myself on track, and then I'll talk a wee bit more about the project. So I'm just going to share some images. So my work is, I would describe it as being research-led and process-driven, and very generally considers the political, ethical, and emotional implications of our changing interactions with matter and the environment. And in doing this, I engage with multiple fields, including agri-policies, biomaterials, archaeology, paleontology. And I seek to expand sort of critical discussions around material sentience and future agricultural relations. And what I mean by agri-relations, I mean that to include the agricultural, the agri-ecological, and all the ways in which agriculture moves beyond the rural and kind of moves through our environments and our relationships. And in order to explore these themes, I often find myself attempting to find materials or processes that can act as a type of access or a bridge between different times or environments. So I select materials and processes that attempt to suspend or hold or make tangible this type of bridging. So, for example, I could find myself examining 800-year-old bog butter, which still could be described as fresh, or using microfading technology, which imposes 10 years worth of light onto a surface, and therefore it reveals its future state in a way. Or more recently, using X-ray and CT scanning technology to access hidden artifacts within stone. So I'm currently thinking through ideas of presence, loss, and agency in relation to climate, crisis, and grief. And I've been researching the terms enargia, meaning the quality of extreme vividness, radiance, or presentness as a type of locating force. Agri-relations, which I've already described. Processes and technologies within conservation and collections, for example, using microfading technology or X-ray and CT scanning as a means to access past or future states. And I'm also really interested in the oscillation between wildness and domestication in canine histories, and what canine and lupine developments communicate about our own relationship to the rural. So that's a very dense sort of chunk of information and a lot of images to sort of scan through. But just to give you a sort of sense of the type of work that I make. So they're kind of installations which can incorporate an outside element and kind of speak to and with each other, and often involve some sort of technological material process. So when I was given the invitation, I was thinking about revisiting a figure I've been doing a wee bit of research with, which is this figure called Kyubiko, which is a Shinto deity, sort of described as a prince or like a scarecrow which cannot move but has infinite knowledge of the world. And he has been revisited recently in a book called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, as a way to kind of think through a sort of the global feeling, I guess, we're all having around like climate crisis and agency. And I was really interested in this figure of the scarecrow, or the stand-in for a person within like rural environments, and also thinking of, I guess, like the islandness as well of this figure. And I was also really interested in thinking through how messages or I suppose like messages are communicated within rural or non sort of city context. So this is a Japanese monster wolf which has been rolled out in Japan. So it's a solar powered robotic wolf which produces different types of sound, but it's a way to prevent certain types of wildlife entering into land. And I was also thinking, whenever I was in Skye, I described it as being incredibly vivid. So I remember saying that whenever I first arrived, if I saw a pterodactyl fly over a camper van, I wouldn't blink an eyelid, because the Skye's time feels very slippery. There are like geological forms, rising up around you. There are paleontological finds everywhere. There are sort of touristic sports cars. It has this kind of very multi-layered vividness, which is at times quite difficult to grasp in a present. You're sort of very aware of lots of different times, but locating yourself there in a type of present felt very slippery. And so in thinking through all these things, my first point of call was the Skye and Lochal Archive Centre, where I began to think through the question that Heather described at the end there: if the land was speaking and you were listening, what would you say back? And I thought about this for quite a long time, and I came to the conclusion that actually I wouldn't say anything, and I wanted to focus on listening and what form listening took. And that led me to think about thinking about where voices exist in land, who is the speaker, who is the listener, and really just thinking through my own work, sculpturally and technologically, the forms that listening can take and how, what forms those could take in a context like Skye. And I was also sort of listening out in a way for other figures in archives or other phenomena within archives that maybe would be like slightly overlooked. So I've been looking at dog figures within the archive and what they communicate in terms of societal shifts at the time, and sort of trying to attune myself to various forms and types of listening. Also paying attention to different forms in land and how very vivid remains kind of communicate past scenarios, and also paying attention to where signage exists, and where like voices crop up within these contexts. And within the project, I wanted to include like various research strands that involve different people that take in Skye's very deep time and moving up from sort of the deep sort of past, the paleontological past of Skye, and right up into its current and imminent future. So I involved a few people, an archaeologist called Giacomo Savani, a classicist called Catherine Earnshaw, I think he's here today, and a paleontologist called Elsa Pansaroli. And across 12 months or more, we undertook several visits across 3 sites in Skye, which initially started with Fassock and then expanded out into 3 other sites which relate to that place as well. And we really started from listening from the ground up, so taking in sort of underlying geological surveys and how the geology connects to other places, looking at how land or landscape was read. So this is an example of Gallic colour theory in a brilliant book, Window to the West, and paying attention to how colour was described, colour measuring, visiting and revisiting sites, doing voice recordings, sound recordings, looking at where graphics, images, and text appear in landscape and how these connect. So, a mineral that connects to an underlying geology because it denotes what minerals are missing from the soil and are required by the farm animals on land. Looking at microscopic examinations of the soil in each site. So really looking at like what is in the place that we were on. So these are the refractive minerals within the soil at Fassock. And this is a lovely moment here where I was reading an excerpt from the Georgics, which talks about how, you'll correct me on this, Catherine Earnshaw, but how farmers through their ploughs would uncover the rusted javelins and marvel at giant bones. So this is an example of what is in the soil and also what is in the soil. This is a bronze spearhead that was found at the same site of where the previous soil image that I showed you. And also looking at how the deep paleontological past connects to us as mammals, and how things from like a deep paleontological time infiltrate into stories, folklore, and identity. One of the project locations will be at the Staffin Dinosaur Museum, looking at how like maps and footprints and residual elements are held and described and sort of suspended in Skye. These are some examples of 3D prints. So I was using a technology that allows like seeing into or listening into stone without having to excavate or to break apart the sample in order to access what's held within. And yeah, so these are all some of the research strands that has led up to the project, which will be launching in July, and I can talk a wee bit more about what the actual outcomes are. But I just wanted to show some of the technologies. So I'll show this film. This is an example of a scanning of a fossil that's held in the Skye and Loch Archive Centre. So it's a way of non-invasively like seeing into or listening in to an object and being able to kind of reveal its internal content without causing any sort of damage to the to the thing itself. And I thought that is a sort of thing to leave from and to part from as a way of thinking about how to engage with people and places might be quite a nice departure point to lead into the discussion. So I'll stop sharing.
So Heather and Lauren, it'd be wonderful to hear some more about how you have kind of interacted as an individual artist and as an arts organisation within this particular island setting. I wonder if you could speak to sort of how that relationship has worked for you both.
Yeah, I can take this one, Lauren, if you want. So I guess it's a really interesting way of starting a project, and it's certainly not one that I've kind of done before, where we were invited by 11 Fasig, that plot of land that we were at with Tua, with that kind of prompt to sort of say, do you want to work collaboratively on a residency together, just to start, having these conversations. And, Two as a project in 11 Fasig is a site where, the School of Plural Future's been there, but many people have visited, many artists and cultural people and local folk, and to have various and multiple conversations. So the residency really is one of many discussions happening there. And we were speaking to James, whose family croft it's on, and he'd sort of said he was really interested in these things, but also that he was excited to hear what an artist's perspective would be on it. And so, Lauren, you had been up doing a little bit of research on Skye separately anyway, and we had gotten to know you and your work, and invited you to come and do a really short visit. So about, was it just a week you were up, 2 weeks perhaps? And that's when you went to visit the Skye archives. Some really great people working there, Catherine and Grace, doing really amazing things in the archives, and just kind of learning and sort of chatting to people for a couple of weeks before coming up with a kind of proposal of what you would like to spend the rest of the residency doing. And since then, you've been up to visit us several times, doing different kind of walks with people, coming along with Elsa Pansaroli, who you saw. I think her hand holding one of the fossils next to some cups of tea in Elgol in one of Lauren's slides, and Giacomo, who's the archaeologist, and Catherine Earnshaw as well. So various visits and different events and discussions over that time. And then really it'll sort of culminate this July when we have the sort of series of exhibitions, and that's going to span across multiple sites, as Lauren was saying, and we're going to invite people to kind of come along and learn and listen with us. But yeah, that's been the journey. Don't know if you have anything else to add, Lauren.
Yeah, I think the main thing that feels very different about this project is the volume of contributors and collaborators, because there's a real sort of physicality to this type of research, in that not much of the research is digital at all. It's about, we've spent so much time like visiting people, being hosted by people, having like many conversations. I think we've started drafting up the contributors and thanks list, and there must be about 50 people on it. And sort of understanding the like interconnectedness of everything and everyone in that place, from historically, materially, socially, and just like really listening out for that. And so much or most information is sort of in people's minds and in people's experiences, and things that cannot be accessed without going and visiting and talking. And I think that has been such a brilliant and rich element to this project, that the nature of what the research is and how the research meets a sculptural output, and how those things can be held within objects, and making objects that aren't an endpoint, they're kind of a prompt or a way of kind of acknowledging some of those conversations without sort of holding or having any ownership over the content.
Mm-hmm.
So it just, and it's also, there's a lot of vulnerability, I think, in the process, because you are, you having to say who you are and what your interests are, and visiting people in a really intimate context, in their house, in their croft, in a place where they've families have lived for generations, and it's been it's been a really different sort of way of researching. But now I don't think there's any going back for me now.
Can I jump in? Do you think that kind of intimacy and your kind of journey to people and to these places is a kind of direct result of Atlas not having a kind of an arts venue that you might be held in?
I think it plays a major factor, because you're not, there's the office where you can meet and there's events held, but there's no yeah, the place is the place. So that's been really useful, I think, because it's not hierarchical in that way. And it's about you going there as opposed to people coming here, which is really different, I guess, from working in or with organizations that have a fixed gallery space. And it's been really interesting to think about how, I mean, it's made me really like question what sculpture can and should be in context, what the materials should be. It's made me think about the nature of sculpture. Sculpture as potentially being distributed, sculpture that has a short timeline, things that disappear and reappear, things that contribute to an ecosystem, and thinking about the distance between things. And it's just been it's been a meaty project, in that it flags up there's a lot of questions that it flags up, but they've been really helpful, I think. Because how do you know how should sculpture exist in these contexts? How do you go about that? And yeah, we've came up with a few ways, like through the project, either through showing work in like venues that exist, or are using them in a slightly different way, and also having things that have a short sort of lifespan. So I've been working with a mineral company that's allowing me to cast sculpture, which will either be like consumed or disappear back into the soil. And also I've been really interested in how like this sculpture could return back, and also potentially hide in plain sight. So a lot of the objects that I'm making will return back to different uses within Skye, and sort of, yeah, I'm interested in this idea of these objects and things be hiding in plain sight after being distributed. After the project, we're doing things on trailers. We're like in a shared grazing ground. Things that have a real sense of mobility and unfixedness, so it doesn't feel like it's a closed-ended conversation or a memorialization of a conversation. It's more a prompt that will continue, so it has a sort of a futureness written into it as well.
And Heather, sort of thinking about time that was sort of so pertinent to Lauren, but also thinking, sorry, about the time in the form of residencies or programming you've described in the past, how you invite artists to participate on Skye, and how that kind of interweaves within the kind of times of the community as well. Could you speak a little bit to that, please, Heather?
Yeah, I mean, I guess something that we've been trying to do a bit more as an organisation is just slow down a little bit, and take the time and allow the space for people to learn and learn and meet folk as well that they might not have had an opportunity to meet yet. And Lauren's that kind of example of coming multiple times to meet people is a really great way of doing that. Another example would be one of our residencies, the Tolbrandolachish artist residency. Well, that's only a month. It's quite a short residency, really, in the scheme of things. there's a lot of flexibility with it, so people can take that residency and stretch it out. If they've got caring responsibilities or work in a different way, they can be flexible with that. And we found that that's allowed people to engage in a pace that works for them, and start to develop their research. The Tober and Dulucas residency, for example, doesn't have an expectation of an outcome. It's just about developing their practice. But artists are artists and end up making the most incredible things from the result of that as well. So I think that's something that we're kind of aspiring definitely to do more of, is allow that time in that space. And often here as well, and from my experience living on Skye, the seasons do kind of dictate things as well. Like in the summer, it is incredibly busy. It's more expensive to come here because it is a popular tourist destination. We don't have a residency space either. So when it comes to Lauren staying, you're often put up in various different places around the island. And so, sometimes in the summer, people are working a lot. They're quite busy in different ways. Often, yeah, tourist industry, and sort of third sector is kind of one of our biggest employers as well. So, yeah, we're moving through that too.
Thank you. I think that probably will resonate for lots of the other kind of case studies we look at today. So I was very kind of keen to give people time and space at the beginning of today. So Hannah, I think if we can open the whiteboard for this session, and if people have questions that they'd like to put in there, I'm aware that things sometimes get lost in the chat on Zoom conversations. So Lauren and Heather, if there are things that you want to address, or if people want to kind of take a moment to ask a question or to jot down some of their thoughts, please feel free to contribute to this whiteboard here. And Heather and Lauren, thank you so much. We'll kind of keep an eye on what comes up here, and please feel free to answer it. But we're going to take, I think we'll probably take about 7 minutes with this whiteboard here before we move on to the next session. So you can add sticky notes, you can write using text. We've got a V. I think that's short for very good. But equally, people can put questions in the chat if they would rather.
I wonder, Laura, would you like us to start responding to some of these now?
I think so. It's quite interesting watching these things coming out.
I don't want to jump in and answer before someone's finished typing, but
go for it.
I can take a stab at some of these. So the one at the top that I can see is, how have you found the community of Skye to the work Atlas Lauren is doing? How receptive have you found? That's a really good question. I think it may be maybe goes back to what I was talking about at the start. You know, this idea of sky as a sort of singular entity, and in its own way is maybe a bit. It's not how I view it anyway. There, you know, there's multiple communities and multiple people and voices and stuff. So it's quite hard to be able to give you a sort of general answer there to be like, yeah, they love it or they're great, because there's plurals in there, isn't there? I imagine that some people are not even aware of what we're doing. But lots of people have been incredibly receptive. And I think as Lauren, you were talking earlier on about the amount of people that have contributed to this project in different ways. I think that's an indication of where we're going right, and things that we're really enjoying and learning with different people. So, you know, an example of that would be that the scanned footage of the fossil is going to be part of a video work, and alongside that video work, Lauren's been working with some of the young people from the School of Plural Futures, who are really interested, you know, really brilliant musicians, and they're really interested in contributing in that way. And that followed on from a session that Lauren and Catherine Earnshaw did with the young people. And so, I don't know, I think that there's ways that you sort of feel through different connections and relationships, and I think that's something I'm really enjoying through that project. So. Yeah. Would you like to pick another one, Lauren?
Yeah, just maybe you've mentioned the scans there. So there was asking, I was curious how you created those scans. Usually at the end of the presentation, what was the process? So I learned about the process through working with Elsa, the paleontologist, and she linked me up with the University of Strathclyde, who then linked me up with the University of Southampton. I don't know if anyone saw the David Attenborough Sea Monster programme. I was lucky enough to apply and get a grant to go down there and borrowed, I think, around 60 kilograms worth of fossils, which I transported singularly from Glasgow to Southampton. So the process is it's held within a CT and X-ray scanner, and basically it's like a CT scanning process that you would have on a person, but it's much higher strength. So the scanning goes through the object and sort of divides it up into slices of bread, if you imagine, and then those slices are recombined into a loaf. So you get an entire walkthrough from every aspect of the inside and the outside of that object. And then from that, you can isolate voids, so things that used to exist within the object and no longer do, or artifacts which you can't see but are in the object itself. So within one of the fossils, if actually this is slightly Blue Peter-ish, but I do have my data handily just down here. In one of the larger fossils, we found several things within it that we couldn't see. And then we were able to make a 3D print from those files. So this object is held within the fossil, which is in the archive center, but it's still within that object, if that makes sense. So we can now kind of encounter this thing without having to excavate it. And then also these are the voids, a print of the voids that are within the ammonite fossil as well. So it's sort of a means to access these things that you wouldn't be able to access. So yeah, that was down in Southampton and Glasgow. There's another question. I was interested in hearing more about the idea of lupine relationships and our relationships with nature. I'm researching how our local landscape and open space is changed by how we're interacting with the space. So I've been really interested in the oscillation between domesticity and wildness, which is very evident in our relationships with dogs. And also there's a lot of conversations around like rewilding and wolves, and bringing wolves back to contexts like Skye. And alongside that, increased a 300% increase in instances of sheep worrying, often by people bringing their dogs and not like sort of letting them off leash at lambing time. And there's a lot of signage that has appeared in that around Skye. But I think the lupine relationship's really interesting because there's not like trying to discover when dogs became wolves and sort of vice versa in the form of sheep worrying. There's no clear answer, and they appear in the landscape of Skye through wolf pits that are still evident, but also in like place names and people's names, and they can either be have a positive meaning or a negative meaning. And what I've been paying most attention to is how people are kind of describing the kind of wolf-like aspects that dogs are displaying. So a lot of signs around. There's been, I think, in the past month, like 3 instances of sheep being killed across Skye. So the sort of the canine lupine thing is a blurry discussion, and I think it sort of it as an extension of a person. You know, the dog is an extension of a person, and the sheep is an extension of another person. It speaks to landscape use in a pretty profound way, or it's evidenced through those like instances in a really profound way about how we see or sanitize landscape, and how we're sort of maybe a little bit estranged from, you know, kind of animal on animal interactions. Yeah, I hope that covered some of that.
I think that's particularly relevant quite often in places that are locations for tourism as well, and that idea of how people are in different places from, you know, that idea of home and away. I'm going to be mean and try and keep us to time here. There are loads of brilliant questions, so thank you, whiteboard contributors. It was fun watching your slow contribution and seeing it start to be populated. I think there's a question, the bottom left-hand one, talking about island mentality, that I think we'll be sort of picking up in future presentations, but to keep in mind that idea of limitation and expansiveness, I think, as we go forward. But for now, Heather and Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your examples of your work in Skye. And yeah, if people do have further questions, I think at this point, if we pop them in the chat, maybe if you haven't had a chance to contribute them, we should hopefully have time at the end if we keep rattling on. So at this point, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce our second pair of speakers. So we're going to be joined by Georgia Newman, who's one of my co-steering group members at Visual Arts Southwest. And she is also the Deputy Director for Creative Islands and lead for the Isle of Wight Creative Network. And she's going to be joined in conversation today by Jamila Boulil, who is joining us from the University of, I'm going to try it, Groningen, is that all right? Who's going to be thinking about mentoring and collaboration, and specifically looking at that idea of brain drain and the opportunities to stay in their conversations with each other, and the value of the arts and ways of working sustainably. So I'm going to hand over to you both, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. Right, yes. I'm just going to shake it out after all of that. That was a really fantastic first part of our discussion, and I hope that ours will contribute to something along those lines. Laura will try and cram in as much as we can. And I'm just going to talk a bit about the Isle of Wight Creative Network and why it exists and how it came into existence as well. So we're all still fairly young in the game, but I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, and now sharing the screen, advanced portion of screen. See if this works again. Oh, how does that look? Everyone see a nice big fancy logo? Right, so this is the Isle of Wight Creative Network, and this is the Isle of Wight. It's on the south coast of England. It is famous for its beautiful scenery, a lot of sailing, Cowes Week and round the island. And it is 23 miles across, 13 miles down, and is around about 4 miles, I believe, away from the mainland, as we call it. And forgive me if I just continue calling all other parts of the world the mainland and us the island, as we are an island with a population of over 140,000. And about half of the island is areas of outstanding natural beauty, otherwise known as national landscapes, which are protected. So a bit about me. So I first came back to the island as a boomeranger, as I like to call it. After graduating from university, I've always educated as a child on the island, came back and very quickly managed to find myself working in the cultural sector at Key Arts, which is on the harbour, a wonderful multidisciplinary arts venue. And I worked there for 14 years as a visual arts manager. And we held works by people like Richard Long, a renowned land artist. And it was just during this time I worked with a lot of artists that were unable to get the access to business support, to find ways of profiling their work, to find ways of getting funding and looking at funding applications. It felt like as an enabler of arts in the sector, I wasn't sort of doing what I could really to support those. So I went on a bit of a quest in 2019 and researched through a project grant from Arts Council England around what were the needs, what was required to help support artists on the Isle of Wight to sustain their creative practices. So this was done through a varied range of sessions, through sort of talks and discussions and surveys, and it went on for quite a while, and looking at other best practices across the southwest. So I looked at Plymouth. Sorry, no, this escaped me. CAMP, that's what it's called. The Contemporary Arts Membership Plymouth. Yeah, I got it right. Okay, so that's good. I got that right. And spoke to their team and how they operated, and then also the arts development programme at Aspects and at A-Space across Southampton and Portsmouth, and Exeter as well, Phoenix Arts, and just looking at what we could do here on the Isle of Wight, because there were only 2 organisations that were funded by Arts Council at that time through their national portfolio of organisations. 2, that's it. So the arts provision was low, and Key Arts was not one of them. It used to be, and then it was taken out. But it's back in now. It's back in. But anyway, staying on track. There was a lot of artists, a lot of creatives across the entire island that felt that they needed to be better connected. That we had obviously provided some opportunities for networking through, gallery openings and artist talks, but there wasn't any of that training available to find out about how to make the most out of maybe selling online or routes to market, or developing your practice and creating collaborations and meeting other people not like ourselves. So meeting with other people. So we fell into priority places, which is the Arts Council's way of defining places that were that needed extra provision. So this was actually a really, really important step in being able to look at gaining other funding from Arts Council England and from the local authority. Is that cutting off, or is that we've got it? Yeah. So the Isle of Wight does not have a provision within the local authority for arts and culture. It doesn't have a unit, doesn't have an arts manager, officer of culture, nothing. But they want to include it in their corporate plan. So first step was get a cultural strategy under your belt. How do you want to incorporate more culture within your corporate plan? You need a plan, you need a framework and a way of delivering that within an organisation. And the organisation used to deliver that and research it was Creative Island, which I now work for. And just to avoid any confusion, I'd finished working with Arts Council at this point, and I started to work freelance just to start working up a pilot programme for the Isle of Wight Creative Network. And Creative Island were underway researching and developing a cultural strategy for the Isle of Wight, which is something that we're delivering now. And this is the lovely logo for Creative Island. So I will make it more human in a minute. There will be people on the screen. And thus the Isle of Wight Creative Network came into existence in 2022. It was post-COVID. So a lot of things that we started to develop were online training sessions around collaboration in the biosphere, understanding about the island as a UNESCO biosphere, what that means, how to develop workshops for community and educational purposes. And our current membership is around about 180 members, and across these disciplines, which is quite a lot. So we try to develop as much as we can across the entire creative industry sector. As I said, it started with a lot of online-based discussions, thinking about building confidence as well, and arts fundraising, and obviously understanding about the biosphere on the Isle of Wight. And not only is it about training, it was about making sure the website was a tool. So we have an online creative community in the way of a directory system, which we'd never had before. There was no way of finding out, okay, what artists are in my area that are working in photography or creative writing or performance or dance. And so that's why we've just developed the website. So it is more of a tool. But the special opportunities that artists can apply for are things like photography sessions with a professional photographer to take images of them or their work. We offered out bursary grants. So this was a result of Kay McCran's bursary grant in 2022, supporting an exhibition on her work on mini beasts in the biosphere. And then a podcaster who did podcasts with his son on Wild White, about the island's natural environment, and interviewing creators with poetry, music and soundscapes at the end of each episode. And this is another one by Sarah Redrup, who explored developing an artist book from illustration. She's an illustrator. And this was on Island Women of Historical Importance that may have gone under the radar. And all of these bursary grants are fairly sort of loosely, sort of like no strings. So we try and make the application process as easy as possible, because we all know how wonderful Grantium can be online. And we wanted to make sure that there was something there so people can tap into it as and when they want it. So we have bursary grants and one-to-one mentoring sessions, and ad hoc sessions as well with an advisor who was here earlier on in the session. I think she's left the room now, but Alice Scott Hawkins, who's amazing. And most importantly was getting together in other spaces that we didn't know about, that we couldn't access readily on the Isle of Wight. So this one being the Makers Guild, which is based in Portsmouth, a very large co-working space based at the Portsmouth Guildhall. And it's fabulously run with different sort of payments systems, and they have 3D scanners and a whole host of resources that you can access, which really, it's only accessible. Well, we only have one space that's like that on the Isle of Wight, and they have very few resources in that way. So this was a very unique opportunity to find out what other people are doing across the region, and then visiting other spaces like Aspects in Portsmouth and Southampton City Art Gallery and God's House Tower, run by Ace Space Arts, and understanding about their provision for young graduates, where they've set up for a Zest collective of graduates from Solent University in Old Northern Road, affordable arts and studio workspaces, which again just don't exist on the Isle of Wight, or not yet anyway. But also visiting the CCI XR at University of Portsmouth, which is a new centre for creative and immersive extended reality, which is quite interesting, because obviously when Lauren was talking about the work with the microfilling technology and the X-ray scanning at University of Southampton, we visited all of those resources as well at University of Southampton for their Arts on Humanities Day visit. So it was about, the Creative Network is about enabling these kind of opportunities to get together, find out what else is going on in the region. If it's not provided here on the island, we can go and access it. but a lot of the time you don't know like what else is out there. So it's a carefully curated program to find, you know, what we can actually access collectively, and how we can make those links to resources. But it's not just universities that we visit, we also just go on walks. So going on a walk is often, you know, a good way to get a good understanding of how other people may connect, and what it is, what's going on in their worlds. And tomorrow we're actually going to visit this place, which is the Archers Open Studios in Southampton. And it's a really, you know, it's a community. It's a part of like being, having a healthy and positive way of looking at the creative industries and how we can better collaborate and make use of the resources that we've got. So being together, you know, in physical spaces as well as online is just as important. And as you can see, we love getting together. And this is one of our latest initiatives to help support young people on the Isle of Wight understand what career potentials are available and what pathways there are available. And this is called Future Works, specifically for 18 to 30-year-olds, and a panel-like discussion. And it's a collaboration as well between the Isle of Wight Creative Network, the music college called Platform One, and Brave Island, which is a programme run from Ventnor Exchange, another arts organisation on the Isle of Wight. So it's a really fantastic way of being able to connect younger people with what else is out there, because if they don't see it, they don't know they can become it. And this was one of the things that we really are quite keen to work on, because the attainment on the Isle of Wight is actually quite low for young people. And I'll talk about this in a minute, because I like to keep it positive if I can, but we do have some reality checks that we need to address, and that'll probably be in our discussion in a minute. But this is our like little spider diagram of the island and how we connect to each other, but we also connect to other things like Visual Arts Southwest and Brave Island, as I just recently mentioned, and other funders like Mike Cowley Trust, the Uncultured. So if we don't have all the resources, these wonderful networks out there do. So we're continuously trying to spread the good word of what else is out there and available. And if you haven't heard of them, then do check these girls out. They're called White Pube. Fantastic collaboration. They've got also a funding library of positive funding applications and evaluations. And this is a resource that I often end on, because I find it's really, really useful when speaking to collectives of artists around what it is that they want to do in their creative practices. And making your life as an artist is a very useful consulting tool by Andrew Simonet, who was actually a choreographer, and you can download it here. And and I know I'm still sharing my screen, but I want to read this bit. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I'm just going to pass over to Jamila. Stop sharing. So there is a quote in that download, which is about artists and scientists. So Andrew says, I think of artists like scientists. Just like scientists, we begin with a question, something we don't know. We go into our studio and research that question. Like scientists, at the end of our research, we share the results with the public and our peers. Some research is basic, useful primarily to other researchers. Some is applied, relevant to everyday life. Both are essential, and most artists do both, creating experimental work that pushes the form, as well as work that is more broadly relevant. And I found that a very interesting way of just segueing into the work that Jamila does. And I could go on quoting out of that book, by the way. Please read it if you can, but I'll pass you over to Jamila.
Yeah, hi. I suddenly realized I'm the only, I think, not native English speaker in the room, and I got nervous about it, and it's really weird. So bear with, I've been speaking English from the moment I was like 5, because in the Netherlands, a lot of people are bilingual, but yeah, so nervous. Hello. I needed to click this button to share my screen. Because like I said, hi, I'm Jamila. If you want to add me on LinkedIn, please do, because I think that is fun and I would like to meet all of you in person someday. I am a scientist, and I remember when I first made the move from science to the creative industries, that I got really confused by exactly that, what Georgia just quoted, is that artists do research as well. So when I say I'm a researcher, most artists think I make art. And then I get hired to make art, and then I'm there like, oh, but I meant I will do a questionnaire. So that's what I do. I do a lot of questionnaires and a lot of data collection, and I'll show you a little bit of what I do. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit from where I'm from. I'm not from an island, but it feels like that sometimes, because I am from the most northern part of the Netherlands, which is that little red dot there, and it's called Groningen. And I'm very proud of Laura for pronouncing it. And if you look at the train network here, you can see these two little lines at the top. There's just 2 trains going to where I am. There's public transport. There's our slogan of our city is "There's nothing above Groningen," because there isn't. There's no other city for miles. This view I took from the internet, but was my childhood bedroom window. These beautiful pictures that you've been showing about your islands is exactly it. It feels very familiar because I live in a space like this. And what I think that what I find interesting in where I'm from is that we have, we're like an elevator city. So we're the youngest city in the Netherlands. The average age is 36. We have 2 universities and 2 colleges, and we have over 60% brain drain, which means that all these young people leave our city within the first 5 years after graduation. And we're trying to aid the talent of staying, coming back, getting them to fall in love with the beauty that is here. And I think that that's where we kind of met in our first interconnection, where we're like, okay, so how can I stay? I love the title of this thing today. We just did a research about it, actually, some colleagues from mine, and they found out that what happens with us is that talent and businesses cannot find each other, that they think that there's more money made into the south. I think for the Isle of Wight, it is the north, because it's a place called London. Here it is a place called Amsterdam. Everybody goes there, never comes back. They leave for love. They fall in love with someone on the other side of the country, and then they move. They also come back for love. I know a lot of people who say I fell in love with someone from the north, and I arrived and I stayed and I never went away because it's so beautiful here. But we have an aging population and a lot of farms, a lot of nature, a lot of beauty. So this is my rural island where I'm at, in a very young city that's surrounded by very old farmers. And then I do research. And I do research into the creative industries, and I look into employment and into, I guess, how organizations like the one, well, like exactly what Georgia described actually just now is how can we do that better? How can we do that more? How can we empower artists? And how can we be better interconnected in this rural island with each other, because we only have each other in the neighborhood, and prevent people from leaving. And what I did is, for my data, I have a data set with 3,000 organizations and how they link up to each other over a 4-year period. And I pulled up one local visual art platform, I think similar to the first presentation, where you can do a residency, you can show your work. And we looked at how they worked with other organizations around locally. So first we looked at spillovers with other creatives. We see that they work with people in the performance art. That's the purple little dots that you see. People in the audiovisual arts, the green little dots that you see. People in the broader creative industries, the orange dot, there's one. And people in cultural education, cultural participation, and heritage. Think about museums, but also music schools where children learn how to play an instrument, and also, for instance, projects that you do with disadvantaged youth or marginalized communities, where people that are, and I hate this word, and I don't have another better word, but amateurs make art with you as a professional. And then what we really looked at is how does it work outside of the creative industry. So I made these gray in a network, and there you see, are they connected to local governments? Are they connected to local primary schools? Are they connected to our universities? Are they connected to media institutions? Are they connected to tourism, like hotels, healthcare? We have a very big hospital. Social care, so the other organizations that work with these marginalized communities, etc. And I wanted to show you something interesting. So the municipality of Groningen said between 2017 and 2020, and this is 2017, you can get money. I circled the municipality. I am not allowed to do that. This is our secret. Shh. That one gray dot over there is the municipality of Groningen. They paid money to this organization in 2017 for a bunch of reasons. So we see a line of money going from the municipality. There's public funding going to this visual art organization. They said, if you do any or all of these things, I will give you money. And you need to use culture to stimulate the local economy. For instance, contribute to talent development or contribute to our tourism by branding the city better. Or you can be an instrument as a visual art organization to support our society, educate citizens, or provide developmental aid. I put it there in these very crude terms, developmental aid, but it is when they're talking about, I hope you're all from small communities, when they're talking about reinvigorating rural communities. Anybody heard that one? Probably. Or the one where they're talking about, well, bringing back the brain drain, making sure that everybody is well taken care of. In our area, 1 in 7 children go to primary school without breakfast. And they have money if cultural organizations help to prevent this or help in any form. I'm going to a performance arts project this afternoon that is about the secondhand clothing for people that can't buy new clothing. And they made a fashion show with these people and wearing the clothes. Projects like this, and we see that they got money in 2017 and they spend it on a collaboration with 1, 2, 3, 4 schools. So next to showing and creating visual art, supporting visual artists, having residency programs, next to showing this art, being an art gallery, a part of their income is coming from being an instrument in educating citizens, local citizens. And in the Netherlands, this is how you mostly make money as a cultural organization. And what we did the last year, which I'm really excited about because I love this idea of talent development, is that we looked at a lower level at young professionals and how these larger organizations support talent development within the creative industries. So not going and teaching children about visual arts in this case, but teaching young professionals that came from local art schools about. And I wanted to show you this one as well. So I have this young producer, they're 22-ish. He's not an artist, he is a supporter of the arts. He's a producer in performance art. He helps organizing festivals, music, concerts, big gatherings of people, any gigantic from very, very gigantic national organizations. He was a producer during Eurovision, to very small concerts and performances. And in his education, which is in Orange, he first started out, I don't know if this is mirrored, but he started out in the orange lines that are in the big network that you see, which is a college where he learned event organizing locally in Groningen. But because you cannot study any higher than that in the arts, if he wanted to do event management at a university, he had to move to Amsterdam. So that is what he did. And then you see him moving to Amsterdam. So that's the orange that's outside of the network. That's kind of why I chose him. And we see another producer that's also in our data set that also did the same. So they moved to Amsterdam to get their formal education as an artist. And his first project in Groningen is that he goes to this school and he does a lot of internships. And these internships are in the pink, which is the already existing sphere. So I don't know how to explain this word. We have this in the Netherlands. We have this. I don't know. I think you have similar in English. Like the people that the Council for Culture thinks is cool. You know, the ones that always get the money, that are the big organizations that are right there. Those ones, that's where you need to be. That's where you want to get in. Then you're in, then you're made it, then you know that you have some income. So his very first internship was there, and he got more internships throughout that network, but he wanted to grow. So he moved to Amsterdam. And then what happened was, while he moved to Amsterdam, one of his supervisors moved from one organization to another, because they're closely related in what they do. They're both in theater, and that other organization is in the same building as an acceleration program. So his final internship was at an acceleration program back in the north, but he had already motivation to come back. And now, when he's working, he works in the northern market, and he starts to use these old contacts that he has again. And what I found very interesting about this is that these acceleration programs, he didn't need it to get in. He was already in the right school, and the school got him his placement. And actually from the first day, when they were, well, I think 16 maybe years old, and they did their first internship, they were already in the big center where you want to be, where the funding goes, where the money goes, where they can pay you. But because he wanted to challenge himself, he went out and he needed to get back in. And he had already contacts, but the other artists that we talked to, some of them were self-taught and they didn't have these connections. And that's why they needed these acceleration programs a lot. Because they didn't go to a formal art school, or because they were from another city and they moved to the city and they needed the connections. And this is and I hope this was 5 minutes. This is my 5 minutes of what I do, and as background on kind of the
Thank
science
you so much,
behind
Jamila.
Getting back.
That's brilliant. I think that's a really interesting point, that kind of access to opportunities, and how perhaps we need to be really mindful that we are sharing those as well, and that there aren't sort of particular routes that hoover up all of that kind of access as well. Georgia and Jamila, I'm just sort of keeping an eye on the time. And I'm thinking, Hannah, if it's possible to have the kind of conversation whiteboard open while Georgia and Jamila are talking, then we can kind of, people can put their questions in, if that's okay. Georgia, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. No, that was brilliant, Jamila. And I think that's quite important, sort of understanding like what is out there, what are the available talent development programs, and thinking about, you know, how do we how do we connect with them? And I suppose I sort of like jumping straight into like understanding and building awareness of the opportunities that are out there, and how you actually find them, how you navigate them, because it's you know, you have to have a reason to stay. I mean, I was sort of one of these very lucky people growing up on the island and then coming back after studying after university and finding a position. But it's not like it came easy. You know, there was a certain amount of research, but no one sort of really tells you to do these things. And I'm interested, like, what was sort of like kept you in your where you live, and you know, how do you combat that brain drain?
Yeah, I stayed for love. But yeah, I am one of those. My partner has a child from a previous marriage, and he goes to primary school in the next big city. So I'm gonna be here for the next 8 to 16 years, and then but I love the place, and I think that that's something where we met. Like we have this feeling with this location where we're from, where we're like in love with the place. And that is something that this respondent, that this producer that I talked to had as well. He was from here and he came back because he wanted to grow here, and the only thing that was really preventing him from growing here was the idea of getting in and getting a job and keeping a job. And you have to be very, very lucky and very tenacious as well, I think.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I think luck plays into it, but I think still you put in that hard work, and nothing comes just landing at your door. I mean, if you're a performer and you want to get onto the circuit, you could be doing it for 6-10 years before, you know, and before building up your networks. And even then, it's remaining active. I think that's sort of one of the key things to sort of really understand about what it is that you want to get out of your creative practice. What is growth and what is success to you? But being in these rural locations, that primarily is because it's actually a very sort of safe place. You know, you do feel safe, you do feel connected with other people. It's a very family orientated environment. So a lot of the people that we have within our network have got families, and then you end up having these discussions around work-life balance.
And a lot of them are, in my data at least, they're married.
Yeah.
Like we have like married couples who work together at same organizations, or like they go how did you find this colleague for this project? And they go, well, because they were married to another one. And it is literally one big family that this creative industries is. And I maybe we should lean into that care ethics more or something, you know, because we are one big family, because we move from a more social perspective, and that's nice. When I hear you talk, George, as well about your walks, then I'm like, that's just connecting on a personal level, and that makes it you trust each other, and that makes it you are safe exchanging financial dealings with each other, I think, and to discuss how you run your business, because we're all, I think, freelancers and one-person businesses.
Yeah, and that actually is an idea that came out from one of our members. She's a branding consultant called Sarah Truckle, and a visual artist as well. And she created these net walks, they're called. And I said, well, why don't we do one for the creative network membership, and go on a network, and it's in a different environment. It's making use of, you know, again, the resources of what we have, you know, in our wonderful countryside, and taking that time to talk to each other without it being too forced. You know, sometimes in a sort of a gallery environment, it sort of becomes a little bit too pressured. But the way in which we try and do things is without that, and making people feel like they can come into a development program without having the dictation of, this is the person that you're going to be talking to, and this is what you need to do. You need to do a certain number of hours, and you need to do all of these outputs, and and it becomes a pressure. And I think we put too much stress on ourselves. And I think that's one of the key things, you know, sort of working in the creative industries. How do you sustain that? You know, when you have all of these pressures of delivering all of these outputs for, you know, organizations or galleries or commissions, you know, and you've got to do 2 talks and you need to do a series of prints and, you know, work
And you
with.
need to do your financial administration and your marketing as well. And then come home, clean the house and do the cooking.
Exactly.
And then I'm like, I sometimes like I don't know when our financial administration is always due in May in the Netherlands. And like the 28th of April, I'm like, oops. And there's this, in the Netherlands at least, there's a special extension program for artists and art organizations. They always get extensions until August. And then me as a researcher gets really annoyed because the policy reports are not done and I cannot collect the data yet. But we need a little bit more time, I guess, because you're so busy with your end networking and you're doing your job, just making art, and you're selling it, and you have all these hats on, and you're doing it all at the same time.
Yeah, and a lot of the time it's you misquote yourself, you know, your own fee, and you don't realize that all that thinking time that you put behind a project as a creative isn't put into the equation. And that's why sometimes a lot of creatives end up in this, I think you coined it, how do you term it, a micro
entrepreneur? Yeah, solo self-employed or micro entrepreneurship. Yeah. Where I have this shocking statistic that I love to share, and I maybe I shouldn't. In the Netherlands, the average artist makes 660 euros before taxes a month for working 7 days a week on their practice. And then they have either a side job that provides them income, or they have a partner that works full time. And they like there's maybe 10% or something that can live off making art, which is, I think, weird and scary. And then I think that because I see the board going on about instruments, I think then there this instrumentalism comes in, where we see that you can only make money as an artist if you are an instrument for a policy, for a fund who tells you if you do a certain amount of education, participation, collaborating with these things that we think are important, then we will fund you. But then you're still not working on actually your core, which is making art.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, Jamila, and I think that's something that we keep coming back to again and again. And interestingly, Heather, I'd love you to pick it up maybe if there's time at the end, the sort of the pros and cons of instrumentalizing art, because we talked about it in previous discussions. I'm going to be the stopwatch of doom again and say thank you again for really populating the whiteboards. They will be back, so don't worry if you were halfway through writing something. So that we don't run out of time, I'm going to hand on now to Tammy Bedford and Jeremy Brown and Tien Roberts from the Isles of Scilly, from Culture on Scilly, and they're going to be sharing some of the work that they do and then giving us a provocation to think through together. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to kick off. So I'm going to share my screen and hope that this works.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So I've got 5 minutes. So this is going to be a really, really quick canter through an overview of, first of all, the Isles of Scilly and then what we're doing in Culture on Scilly. A quick disclaimer, I don't actually live on the islands. I live in Cornwall on the mainland, but my colleague Jeremy Brown, who's also here, does live on the islands, as does Tien, who will be speaking in a short while. For some reason... Right, so the Isles of Scilly, I'm not going to read through all the bullet points. I think the headlines are that the islands are outstandingly beautiful. They're outstandingly remote. It takes about 2.5 hours to get there on the boat. and they are outstandingly small. The largest island, as you can see, is under 3 square miles. So really, really, really tiny. And in terms of the figures, the total population across all 5 islands is just over 2,000. Some of the islands have 60 residents. So that just gives you an idea of the scale compared with the number of visitors every year. So this massive change of scale when it's in season, and tourism is the biggest driver of the economy on the islands. And that final point about the ageing population, which leads on to the challenges, and these are going to be familiar to a lot of you. I know they're shared by other island communities and by rural locations, but I think the 2 last ones, the issue around climate and weather, is crucial for Scilly. I did hear that this winter, during the winter, the boat doesn't run from the mainland. It's only flights, and which are completely weather dependent. And this winter had the highest number of cancellations in living memory. And if there are no flights, nobody can get on or off the islands. And the weather also affects the freight boat as well as passenger. So if the freight boat can't run, there's no food in the co-op. So it really is a very kind of fragile kind of community in that sense. Both with the transport links to and from the mainland, as I've just described, but also between the 5 islands. Transport to and from Scilly is also incredibly expensive. So that is a real issue. But moving on to some of the nice stuff, Jeremy and I have been working on cultural development on Scilly for about 7 years now, initially through the Arts Council's Cultural Destinations scheme, which was set up to support projects that were linking arts and tourism. And we've been able to continue general cultural development work through Arts Council support. We're now on our 3rd project grant and just starting the process of writing the next one. Like the Isle of Wight, we have priority place status, and that's been a real boost in terms of, I guess, putting us on the radar, and also the number of people that are now interested in coming to work with us, which is really encouraging. We do have a manifesto for culture. That's our cultural strategy, and I can put links to our website in the chat so that you can kind of follow all of this up later, because we don't have time to go through it. But I think our main aim through what is now called Culture on Scilly is to enable residents on the islands and visitors to engage with high quality arts and culture in all its forms. And we do that. There are kind of 3 key strands of activity. One is supporting the creatives that live and work on Scilly, and Tian will say a bit more about that in a minute. And we've done that through, we promote the work of Scilly artists. We have run open studio events as part of cultural festivals. We work with Scilly artists on putting their own grant applications in, or providing business development support through some of the Cornwall agencies. So that's a key part of our work. We've also run a number of commissions over the years and facilitate the creation of new work across all art forms. And sometimes this is with Scilly artists, and sometimes it's with artists from further afield. The most recent public artwork is by Luke Jerram. That's the lovely little moon there, which is a sort of offshoot of some of his bigger moon projects. And our aim there is about facilitating the creation of new work, which is very much place-based and has a connection to Scilly in some form or other, and also engages people. So when people come from the mainland, part of their brief is to either work with Scilly artists or Scilly communities and make those connections. And we also programme live arts events. We don't have a bespoke cultural venue at the moment. We will have soon, which I'll come on to in a sec. But in the meantime, we produce and present theatre, spoken word, music, dance in community venues, and we have a great pub on St Mary's that is one of our key presenting partners, the Old Town Inn. And we also have partnerships with mainland organisations, whether they're theatre companies or touring agencies, which is a really critical part of our work because we can't do it unilaterally. So the final bit from me is just to give you the heads up on our big new project, which is a partnership between the Council of the Isles of Scilly, the museum, and a number of major funders, Levelling Up, NLHF. So we've managed over the last few years between us to generate £15 million, which is quite phenomenal. And the project is now underway to refurbish the town hall on St Mary's. And when it opens in 2 years' time, fingers crossed, it will be a beautiful new museum and an arts centre venue with all of the facilities that go alongside that. So that will then be a home for a lot of the Culture on Scilly work, although there still will be some outreach. But I'm going to hand over now to Tian, who is an artist who lives and works on Scilly.
Thanks, Tammy. Can everyone hear me okay? Great, thank you. Yeah, so we haven't got very long, so I've actually just put my links to my website in the chat if you would like to see any more of my work. I believe that there should be a slide with a picture of mine on, but I'm not sure if that got added or not. Okay. So I grew up on the islands, and I moved away at 16 when most people move away. If you want to keep going to school, there's no further education here, so to do that. And I came back in 2019 when I decided that I wanted to be an artist, which was very good timing, as I'm sure you all understand. But my work is quite different to a lot of the work in the Isles of Scilly, because it's not really geared at all to being particularly saleable within a tourist market. It's more of a kind of contemporary fine art practice. This is one of my photographs just on the screen now, a project about blue moons, which was about using the kind of amazing rock formations of the island as a kind of way to open a portal to some kind of space that existed outside normal time and space. So my little elevator pictures on the screen now that I use photography, film, sculpture, and writing to make work about magic and myth that is both otherworldly and deeply rooted in body and place. So having returned to the cities and making more contemporary artwork, it's interesting to discover different ways to share that. So I think it's now a good time to move on to the question. Is that a good time for us? Great. So yeah, we were asked today to put a question together for everybody to kind of think about and answer. So we were thinking that as an arts priority place, we have opportunities to create ambitious place-based work in response to our unique islands, which we want to be accessible to as many people in the contemporary art world as possible. For people to be engaged, as many people as possible to be engaged with contemporary art. So our question is, when you are based in a remote location and your practice is highly place-based and site-specific, but your output is not traditionally saleable, how can you reach a wider audience? So yeah, that's what we'd love to hear your thoughts on, please. Everyone,
thank you so much, Tian. So when you're based in a remote location, your practice is highly place-based and site-specific, but your output is not traditionally saleable, how can you reach a wider audience? And I think it's worth also thinking from the other perspective of the arts organisation, creating provision in these places. How do we create an economic space in which people can live and stay?
So yeah, my experience of being an artist here, it's incredible. Honestly, it is such an incredible privilege. I feel so lucky and inspired to be able to have access to this kind of location to make work in that is just so inaccessible to most other people. And, you know, if you wanted to come here and do a project, particularly I work a lot in photography or in film, the logistics of getting here, of finding a time when the tide is right and the weather is right for what you want to do, it would be so difficult. So being able to just be in this location, and I know it really well from being a child here, so I know what the tide does at what times and what time of year and what the light is like in different places on the island at different times of day. So yeah, it is really, really wonderful to be here making art. And in terms of showing art, it's something I've been a little bit nervous around because my work is weird, and I'm very visible on the islands, as we all are. It's a very small community. So I'm kind of branching into that with Tammy and Jeremy's help actually a bit more lately, which is really great. We've got a project, my partner and I, about labyrinths that we are currently working on, that is about the kind of labyrinths and mazes that are on the cities, these kind of mystical sort of folk pieces that exist on the islands. And other than that, I kind of show my work on the mainland mostly. I've currently got a show that opened yesterday in Exeter. With some Exeter University students have done a show with myself and Melanie, who I think was someone mentioned earlier, and another artist as well. So I'm going to go and see that on Saturday, I hope. So it's mostly I show work on the mainland, but often I can't get to go to the openings and things because I can't get off the island. So it's like that kind of networking opportunity and that sort of celebratory aspect is quite often not really as accessible. But so it is a bit of a trade-off in that regard. Is there anything else anyone would like to know about particularly?
I'm wondering, Tammy and Jeremy, if there's anything in the whiteboard that sort of speaks to your experiences as kind of arts providers through your work. If not, you field it, Tammy.
I mean, I think I can see some comments about opening up studios and linking to festivals, which that does work, and we've done that. I think Tian is unusual for Scilly. A lot of we put up a slide that said there's about 40 something creatives, which is a huge proportion for such a small population, but a lot of the artists and makers who live and work on Scilly are kind of geared to the tourist market, I would say. And I think Tian's practice is more unusual, and that was why we kind of framed the question in the way that we did, because it's really, how do you if your work isn't commercial or sort of accessible in that way, how can you allow people to engage with it? So yeah, I think that's our key challenge, I think. I'm just reading the comment from Jamila about the support from local government. In fact, we are part of the Council of the Isles of Scilly. I didn't say that in my presentation, but the Arts Council funding that we get goes to the local council, and they are the lead body for the new cultural centre and museum at the moment, until such time as it's taken over by a new organisation. Yes, and I think there's a comment that sort of suggests that actually it's not just that issue around engaging people with contemporary art practice isn't just an issue for remote locations, and I think that's probably right.
Rosemary, you've asked a couple of times about the nature reserves, the island biosphere reserves, in particular on the Isle of Wight. and online working for those who need to work remotely. And I'm guessing your broadband issue might be related to this as well, something that is experienced in rural and island locations. Can anyone speak to that idea of the reserves and how the kind of ecology and economy of islands is interrelated in that way?
So what's the question about the Isle of Wight biosphere? The biosphere itself brings together people, place and environment. So it's about those three things working together. And there's, I think, 7 in the UK. And so the Isle of Wight is a biosphere. And it's an accolade. And it was given in 2019. And it's a way of building on and harnessing how we can make better use of the resources that are here and how we can work in harmony. Not just it's about nature, it's not just about natural environment, it's about the built environment, it's about us, it's about community, it's about culture, it's about the 33 parishes that exists on the island as well. So it's quite it's all kind of encompassing mix of different things, and that can actually levy different other sort of funding bodies as well to support things around housing. It can support things around tourism. It can support things around supporting the environment and healthcare. So it's a very important factor for the Isle of Wight, and it's quite the zeitgeist at the minute, and people are finding different ways of interrogating it and breaking it to become more sort of everyday speech, I suppose, because when we think of biosphere, probably just think of like Eden Project domes, like what does it really mean? So we've actually got our first Isle of Wight festival, Biosphere Festival, on the 29th and 30th of June, which is an island-wide way of building that awareness. So that's sort of one of the things. But the problem is that it comes against planning infrastructure. You know, there are organisations that will probably be able to speak a lot better than I can, and it's about the planning infrastructure on the Isle of Wight. But yes, it is. Yeah, it's certainly an issue. But there are ways that the Isle of Wight biosphere and its principles are built into planning conversations within the council. So there are sort of ways it can support proposals and policy making, more importantly.
Heather, can I come on to you, please, in our closing moments? Thanks, Georgia.
Oh, I'm on mute. Can you hear me now? Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting, Rosemary, that you mentioned the biosphere reserves. There isn't one on Skye and in Lacalsh, but there is into Westeros. There is the kind of Westeros biosphere reserve there. And when I was a bit younger, I did some work as a youth advocate for the biosphere reserve. And interestingly, one of their kind of priorities is talking about how they can retain young people in the region. So I thought that fed in quite nicely to some other conversations that we've been having. And they host a lot of kind of different cultural and creative projects, because as Georgia says, the model of a UNESCO biosphere is quite interesting in that it is not about a reserve that is fenced off and is kept for nature with people excluded. The idea is that people are living and working in that region, and I love that as an idea, because it's something we talk about quite a lot in Skye, and we talk about it with the youth group that we're working with, the School of Plural Futures, and through lots of our projects, like how land is used and who gets to be on it. And I think culture and artists are brilliant at navigating what are quite complex questions around that too.
So thank you so much, Heather, and thank you, Rosemary, for bringing that to our attention. As we have amply demonstrated here, we've taken on a ginormous topic that we couldn't hope to cover during the last 2 hours fully, and I feel like we're just sort of scratching at the surface here. And we really hope there is going to be a questionnaire that comes out, a survey following this, and we really hope that you are happy to participate in it so that we can secure funding for future projects in this way with Visual Arts Southwest. We really appreciate the time that people would take to do to do that for us. I just wanted to pull together a few kind of notes that have popped out during the course of this morning that have really felt very kind of transitional for me. That idea, Tammy, that you spoke about in terms of changes in scale. Georgia talking about that idea of the boomeranger, and Tien, you spoke about it as well, that idea that we come and go to these places, and how we are here. I think, Heather, you use that phrase, you know, how do we come to be in these places? How do we relate to them? Where else can art exist? That felt like an important question to ask as a method for survival, a strategy for resilience. And it felt like we didn't quite get there, but that idea of instrumentalizing art, is it always a bad thing? Is it something that is a necessity? Can it have a kind of positive impact on ourselves as artists and as art organizations? And that idea that, you know, how our communities formed, that a person isn't an individual, that we are a kind of reflection of the community and the place that we are in. So apologies for the kind of cramming of the schedule. I'd like to thank so much our speakers, Heather, Lauren, Jamila, Georgia, Tammy, Jeremy, and Tien. And thank you all of you for coming today. We'll try and make the kind of the questions and the information that appeared on the boards available to you all. But yeah, thank you so much. And any comments and feedback, we'd really appreciate it from you. So thanks so much. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, bye.
Thanks, bye.